Hey friends, welcome back to the Irony Shelf. Tonight we open Volume 2 with Mrs. Packletide's Tiger by Saki. The manicured parlours of Edwardian London may not appear as wild as the jungle, but here the most dangerous games are played over a silver tea service. In this world, a sharp tongue is more lethal than a rifle. Now, pour yourself a glass of sherry and meet the social saboteur. Close your eyes and imagine the heavy, muffled silence and airless calm of a London parlour in the sweltering summer of 1911. You are standing on a rug so thick it swallows the sound of your footsteps. The air is still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of beeswax polish and the steam from a silver tea service that has been buffed until it glows like a dying star. There is a clock on the mantel, gilded, ornate and relentless, ticking away the seconds of a life where every gesture is a calculated move. You feel the slight, stiff itch of a high lace collar against your neck, and the weight of a world that expects you to be perfect. Outside, the carriage wheels rattle on the cobblestones, but in here, there is a battle brewing, a war of whispers against the soft clink of porcelain. It is a world of exquisite manners and expectations, where a woman's entire future might hinge on the tilt of a hat or the social triumph of a single invitation. Indeed, this is a grand theatre where vanity might find itself upstaged. And here, dear listener, we begin our story. It was Mrs. Packletide's pleasure and fixed intention to shoot a tiger. Not that a sudden lust to kill had suddenly gripped her, or that she felt a moral duty to leave India safer than she had found it, with one less wild beast per million of inhabitants. The compelling motive for her sudden turn toward the hunt was the fact that Loona Bimberton had recently been carried 11 miles in an aeroplane by an Algerian aviator, and talked of nothing else. Only a personally procured tiger skin and a heavy harvest of press photographs could successfully silence that sort of thing. Mrs. Packletide had already arranged in her mind the lunch she would give at her house in Curzon Street, ostensibly in Loona Bimberton's honour, with a tiger-skin rug occupying most of the foreground and all of the conversation. She had even designed in her mind the tiger claw brooch that she was going to give Loona Bimberton on her next birthday. In a world supposedly swayed by hunger and by love, Mrs. Packletide was an exception. Her movements and motives were governed entirely by dislike of Loona Bimberton. Fate proved obliging. Mrs. Packletide had offered 1,000 rupees for the opportunity of shooting a tiger, without too much risk or exertion, and it so happened that a neighbouring village boasted of being the favoured rendezvous of an animal of respectable reputation. Driven by the infirmities of age, the beast had abandoned game-killing and confined its appetite to the smaller domestic animals. The prospect of earning 1,000 rupees stimulated the sporting and commercial instincts of the villagers. Children were posted night and day on the outskirts of the local jungle to turn the tiger back in the unlikely event he tried to roam away to fresh hunting grounds. Meanwhile, the cheaper kinds of goats were left about with elaborate carelessness to keep him satisfied with his present quarters. The one great anxiety was that he might die of old age before the date appointed for the Mem Sahib's shoot. Mothers carrying their babies home through the jungle after a day's work in the fields hushed their singing, fearful that they might disturb the restful sleep of the venerable herd-robber. The great night duly arrived, moonlit and cloudless. A platform had been constructed in a comfortable and conveniently placed tree, and there crouched Mrs. Packletide and her paid companion, Miss Mebbin. A goat, gifted with a particularly persistent bleat, the sort even a partially deaf tiger might be reasonably expected to hear on a still night, was tethered at the correct distance. With an accurately sighted rifle and a miniature pack of cards for solitaire, the sportswoman awaited the coming of the quarry. "I suppose we are in some danger," said Miss Mebbin. She was not actually nervous about the wild beast, but she had a pathological dread of performing 1 ounce more service than she had been paid for. "Nonsense," said Mrs. Packletide. "It's a very old tiger. It couldn't spring up here even if it wanted to." "If it's an old tiger, I think you ought to get it cheaper. 1,000 rupees is a lot of money." Louisa Mebbin adopted a protective elder sister attitude towards money in general, regardless of nationality or denomination. Her energetic intervention had saved many a rouble from being wasted in tips in some Moscow hotel. Francs and centimes clung to her instinctively, even in circumstances which would have driven them headlong from less sympathetic hands. Her theories as to the market value of tiger remnants were cut short by the appearance of the animal itself. As soon as it caught sight of the tethered goat, it lay flat on the earth, less from a desire to take advantage of all available cover, and more for the purpose of snatching a short rest before commencing the grand attack. "I believe it's ill," said Louisa Mebbin, speaking loudly in Hindustani, for the benefit of the village headman, who was perched in wait in a neighbouring tree. "Hush!" said Mrs. Packletide, and at that moment the tiger commenced ambling towards his victim. "Now, now," urged Miss Mebbin with some excitement. "If he doesn't touch the goat, we needn't pay for it." The bait cost extra. The rifle flashed out with a sharp crack, and the great tawny beast sprang to one side and then rolled over in the stillness of death. In a moment a crowd of excited villagers had swarmed onto the scene. Their shouting quickly carried the glad news to the village, where the beating of drums took up the chorus of triumph. And their triumph and rejoicing found a ready echo in the heart of Mrs. Packletide. Already that luncheon party in Curzon Street seemed within her grasp. It was Louisa Mebbin who drew attention to the fact that the goat was in death throes from a mortal wound, while no trace of the rifle's deadly work could be found on the tiger. Evidently the wrong animal had been hit, and the beast of prey had succumbed to heart failure, caused by the sudden report of the rifle, accelerated by old age. Mrs. Packletide was understandably annoyed at the discovery, but she was the possessor of a dead tiger, and the villagers, eager for their 1,000 rupees, gladly supported the fiction that she had shot the beast. Furthermore, Miss Mebbin was a paid companion. Therefore Mrs. Packletide faced the cameras with a light heart, and her subsequent fame reached from the society pages of the London weeklies to the illustrated supplements of the St. Petersburg journals. As for Loona Bimberton, she refused to look at a newspaper for weeks, and her letter of thanks for the gift of a tiger claw brooch was a model of restrained emotions. The luncheon party she declined. There are limits beyond which suppressed emotions become dangerous. From Curzon Street, the tiger-skin rug travelled down to the manor house, and was duly inspected and admired by the county. It seemed a fitting and appropriate thing when Mrs. Packletide attended the county costume ball in the character of Diana, goddess of the hunt. She refused to fall in, however, with Clovis's tempting suggestion of a primitive dance party, at which everyone should wear the skins of beasts they had recently slain. "I should be in a sorry state," Clovis confessed, with only a meagre rabbit skin or two to wrap up in. "But then," he added, with a rather mischievous glance at Diana's costume, "my figure is quite as good as that professional dancer's." "How amused everyone would be if they knew what really happened," said Louisa Mebbin, a few days after the ball. "What do you mean?" asked Mrs. Packletide quickly. "How you shot the goat and frightened the tiger to death," said Miss Mebbin, with her disagreeably pleasant laugh. "No one would believe it," said Mrs. Packletide, her face changing colour as rapidly as though it were flipping through a book of fabric samples at closing time. "Loona Bimberton would," said Miss Mebbin. Mrs. Packletide's face settled on an unflattering shade of sickly white. "You surely wouldn't give me away?" she asked. "I've seen a weekend cottage near Dorking that I'd rather like to buy," said Miss Mebbin, with seeming irrelevance. £680, freehold. Quite a bargain, only I don't happen to have the money. Louisa Mebbin's pretty weekend cottage, named by her Les Fauves, that is, the wild beasts, is vibrant in summertime, with its garden borders of Tiger-Lilies. It remains the wonder and admiration of her friends. "It is a marvel how Louisa manages to do it," is the general verdict. Mrs. Packletide indulges in no further big game shooting. "The incidental expenses are so heavy," she confides to inquiring friends. And here, dear listener, we conclude our reading of Mrs. Packletide's Tiger, written by Saki, and respectfully adapted for the modern listener. Hector Hugh Munro, known by his pen name as Saki, was born in Burma, the son of an officer in the Imperial Police. This colonial upbringing provided him with a sharp, unsentimental perspective on the British Empire that few of his London-bound peers possessed. While he is celebrated for his wit, his early professional life was defined by the rigid discipline of the colonial service. This background created a fascinating tension in his work. The vast, often absurd, distance between the polished manners of London society and the dusty, practical realities of the imperial outposts. Munro's approach was that of a surgical observer. He wrote for an audience that was intimately familiar with the rules of the Edwardian drawing room, and who delighted in seeing those rules playfully unravelled. In choosing his famous pseudonym, likely a reference to the cupbearer in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, he created a persona that acted as both a participant in and a keen observer of the elite. He didn't just write satires. He crafted elegant studies of social hypocrisy, using his concise, rhythmic prose to gently lift the gilded layer of his more famous contemporaries. In doing so, he challenged the polished wit of Oscar Wilde, the sentimentality of Rudyard Kipling, and the sunny, harmless absurdities of P.G. Wodehouse, replacing them with a much sharper, more surgical wit. Mrs. Packletide's Tiger first met the public eye on April 12, 1911, appearing within these very pages of the Bystander. It was a time when the sharp, illustrated layouts of the weekly press were the heartbeat of London's literary scene. The story was so well received that it became a cornerstone of Saki's 1911 collection, The Chronicles of Clovis. Critics of the day were struck by its economical brilliance, marvelling at how Saki could deftly puncture the vanities of Edwardian society in fewer than 1,500 words. The inspiration for the story was rooted in a very real and very expensive Edwardian obsession: big game hunting. In 1910, a tiger skin rug was more than decor. It was a quiet testament to one's wealth and cultivated bravery. Having spent his childhood in Burma, Saki saw the deep irony in these carefully choreographed events. He witnessed how local trackers and beaters often bore the true burden of the hunt, ensuring their high society clients could claim a triumph without ever truly leaving their comfort zone. While no singular Mrs. Packletide appears in Hector Hugh Munro's personal diaries, she is likely a vivid composite of the competitive socialites he encountered in Mayfair, a relic of a world where the social eclipse of a rival was a far more coveted prize than any animal. And so, the curtain falls on Mrs. Packletide. If you too find a certain charm in the art of the ironic and the unexpected, we invite you to join our growing circle by liking and subscribing. Your support helps the Irony Shelf continue curating volumes like this one every week. Thank you for listening. I look forward to sharing our next story with you very soon.